Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moni wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the podcast, and please subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Ghana, Himalaya, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Mary Sullivan. She is here to celebrate her YA novel in verse. It's called High. Before I invite Mary into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the podcast is brought to you by The Cookie by Manny Showalter. Lauren has a difficult decision of upholding traditional beliefs and value systems that have been taught to her by her parents, or giving in to what her school crush Robbie wants, the cookie. In an ideal world, Lauren would take heed to her parents' warnings about sex, but peer pressure and her infatuation with Robbie is making her challenge everything she knew to be true. Guys are nothing but trouble. Or are they? Read the story of Lauren and Robbie to see what decision she will make. The Cookie is a great way to begin those conversations with our tweens and teens that can be difficult to have. Check it out today. The Cookie by Manny Showalter. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is also brought to you by Abigail's Dragons by Patrick Matthews. Abigail's Dragons is about a girl who wakes up in a cave and discovers that she has a healing magic. She's told that her magic is growing and that it will turn her into a monster if left unchecked. She's not alone in the cave. There are other kids, also with magic, who are kept asleep. Even though she's only 11, she dedicates herself to protecting these kids, healing them, and draining away their magic to keep them safe. But what if she's been lied to? What if her cave of healing is actually a prison? How can she save the sleepers when she doesn't even know how to save herself? Find out by getting your copy of the exciting Abigail's Dragons by Patrick Matthews. It's a Reading with Your Kids certified great read, and it would be a great addition to any family library. Join us right now from the beautiful city of Cambridge, just a stone throw away from Reedville. I'm really excited. Our guest today is the author of the YA title, High. It's a YA novel in verse. Please welcome to the show, Mary Sullivan. Hey, Mary, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me today, and happy summer, everybody.
Yeah, it is summertime here in Boston and Cambridge. And before we start talking about High, people talk, they talk about Boston and Cambridge. We're literally side by side, or just, there's a river that separates the two cities. But they're really different cities. Would you agree?
I would, yes. Very different places. And I went to school at UC Berkeley, and people often compare Boston to Cambridge to Berkeley and San Francisco, and I think that's a pretty good comparison. So Berkeley being the Cambridge and San Francisco being the Boston, but very different places in many ways.
Yeah, it's just a completely different vibe. If you do come to Boston, be sure to get on the red line and go across the river to get into Cambridge, Harvard Square, Central Square, Inman Square. They're all such neat little places, great places to visit, great places to listen to music and to eat and just to hang out.
Absolutely, yeah. Great cafes, bookstores. You can bike everywhere too. So if you don't take the T, it's really easy to bike around now, and they've made really good bike paths because I bike a lot. It's a fun place to be, and there are students around this summer, so it's vibrant.
Yeah. And I know that High is a great fun read for our young adults. Tell us all about the book, please.
High is a novel in verse for young adults, and it actually, the seed of it came out of my fifth grader's experience at school, where she had a friend who she had gone to school with for 6 years. And that friend, the mom of the friend, OD'd. And it happened so suddenly that we were all pretty shocked in a very small school, public school in Cambridge. And, I'd seen this woman and knew her son. And it was, I think, very eye-opening for me, just thinking of the experience of ODing and the opioid crisis, just cutting across the board of class, race, everything, that it affects all of us. And it left this boy without a mother. It left him, his father was out of the picture. The boyfriend just took off. So he did have two grandmothers, luckily, that he could go live with. But my story was really about, what do you do? What happens to the kids of these families who are involved with this kind of substance abuse? And how does one, find meaning in life? And how does one, a young adult, hold on to their dreams at this kind of crisis point in their life, something they have no control over? So that was the seed of it. I didn't know them so well that my characters translate to them at all. My characters are new. They're not those characters. That was just the seed. My character is a girl. Her name is Ceti, named after a constellation. And she is a fantastic soccer player. And so the other part of this is I really wanted to write about girls who are strong, who are athletic. Boys get a lot of attention in young adult middle grade, but I thought it was important to recognize girls in sports, strong girls. And at the same time, that's what she has going for her. She's a soccer star. She struggles every day with her mother's addiction. Before the mother in my book ODs, she doesn't die in my book. This is fiction, just to clarify. But my story is about holding on to dreams and really making those dreams work for young adults, finding resources, finding what you love and following through on that, even when everything else is falling apart.
As you're talking about this young girl who has all these hopes and dreams and potential, but at the same time, there's all this conflict and chaos in her life with her mom, with the opioid addiction. I imagine that there are countless teens out there in similar circumstances who have all this promise, all this hope, all this talent, all this potential, but because of some substance abuse that's going on in the family or mental health issues or what have you, that there are so many kids who are unable to reach their potential because of what's going on around them.
Absolutely. And, these dreams can be small or big, but it's just a matter of holding on to them. And the other part of this is, teens have the highest rate of substance abuse. They have the highest rate of deaths from drugs, and they have the highest denial as far as this won't happen to me. So my book, this is reading with kids, and my book is ideally to open up conversations about drugs, what it means. So, these kids might recognize, so where it sounds, great. Oh yeah, let's get high. But where does this lead? Where does it go? What does it mean? And to have these kind of conversations before one becomes addicted to a drug, or, before one really thinks it through and has this kind of awareness. So it's to open up conversations, ideally with families, with peers, and to look at, this opioid crisis in our country, a crisis that was started, there are many kinds of substance abuse, but if we think of the opioid crisis and we think of the Sackler family promoting a drug that they said had a 1% chance of people becoming addicted to, it's just a crime, all to make money. And the power of these companies, that they had, the pharmaceutical companies, to push these drugs in areas that, like Kentucky, like Maine, things like that. So it's to open up these wider conversations and really make kids aware and hopefully, make better decisions in the end.
Mm-hmm. These conversations, we talk a lot about this on the podcast. And in fact, 5 years ago when I started the podcast, before I understood all the benefits that kids get from reading with their parents, the vocabulary advancement and learning how to read and developing empathy and being able to imagine themselves figuring out problems through a fictional character, I just knew that the bond that happened between me and my now adult kids, because we were reading together. And I also knew that the conversations that we were able to have about drugs, about other issues, all started when my kids were 2 and 3 and 4 years old, and we were reading together. I wasn't talking to kids about opioids when they were 3 or 4, but I was asking them about the choices that were being made in the stories that we read. And so that's, I've really encouraged families to, if you're listening to this and you only have a 4 or 5-year-old and you say, well, I don't have to worry about this issue now. No, this is the time to start thinking about it and start having these conversations.
Yeah, and I think it is, it's a safe space to open up conversations with fictional characters and to really get a lot of ideas out on the table. One other thing Cambridge does if anybody is living in Cambridge or around Cambridge, is they've had these parent-child book clubs. And I've brought my kids to them. My oldest is 20 and my youngest is 12. So for the last about 12 years, we've been going to these parent-child book groups where they choose a book, talk about it, eat pizza, and it's a wonderful conversation with the community. And, and that it actually is very similar to what you're doing with these podcasts, trying to get these notions out, the word, ideas, and whatever else should be up for discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the opioid crisis in particular, I think there are so many layers to it. And I think it's helping us as a society look at the issue of substance abuse in a more mature way, as opposed to just say no. It's easy. And if you use drugs, you're a weak person and blah, 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 blah. There's a lot that's happening in the opioid crisis. There's obviously people started taking these drugs because their doctor, the medical professionals that they trust, said it's safe, it's not addictive. They got hooked. It was unintentional. There was an evil company, an evil family drove this crisis, drove the doctors to prescribe and to really push those drugs out there. So we're starting now to look at all the different things that have gone into this, and hopefully we'll, as a society, learn to understand that not every issue can be fixed with a slogan. We need to look at all the different layers of what's going on in people's lives and support them the best we can so that they can live happy, full lives.
Absolutely. And it's only by understanding where people come from, what the origin of the problem is, and really seeing it, as a 3-dimensional problem for each person, because everybody is so different. And one other thing that I try to do in High, it's a novel in verse. So there are less words on the page. I try to make them sound like music, so they're more visceral, they're more emotional, and they are more accessible to the reluctant reader. So for me, that's important because I want everybody to read this book. I want kids who might not pick up a book otherwise to read this book. And so that's why I chose this format. Well, and because it really chose me in a lot of ways. But there is a real impact, with the words on the page and the way they kind of go down the page, like one might read a phone. There's a kind of music and a kind of visual and auditory sort of compelling nature to the page that brings kids in. And I think with more white space, it allows them to engage more. It allows them to put their own experience in some of that white space and use their imagination in there. And, and I had a student come. I had met some of my students last night. I teach at Harvard Summer School and Harvard Extension School. And I invited about 30 students over, and it was really inspiring to see them. But one of them said she teaches some kids who have they just have some difficulty in the class for different reasons, behavioral issues or special needs or whatever. And she said that the curriculum mandated that they read this like FDR speech or something that no kid really wanted to read. And she said she just blew it off and she gave them my book. And for like a lot of those kids, she said it was the first book they'd ever finished. They ever read from front to end, from the beginning to the end. And that to me is why I write, why it matters to me. And, and hopefully it had an impact on them. And she said, some of these kids, you don't know where they're coming from, but one of them, was living in a tent, in the woods and going to school and nobody knows. So you don't know what their backgrounds are necessarily or how these problems start or what kind of desperate situation they're under. So, it's complicated. And my goal is just to have as many people as possible read the book and really, I hope, find some inspiration from it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. And isn't it amazing when you find somebody who hasn't read much or hasn't read any book, and then there's something we've had it happen. I've had it happen at different events I've been at live, and I've shared a really silly little picture book with a 13-year-old who told me she hates to read, and suddenly she's reading this book with these weird names and words, and she's just laughing and giggling, and she's not putting the book down. And I'm sure that was the same feeling that you had when you're hearing from this teacher.
Absolutely was. I mean, that is exactly what I do this for, why all the work is worth it. It's not to, glamorize anything, because writing isn't really glamorous at all. It is actually to make a difference in any child's life and to get them to read. One of my favorite authors, Jason Reynolds, said he never read a book until he was 17. And he is a fabulous author. He said he learned to read from listening to hip hop. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of that is the sounds. It's really listening and seeing where people are at and then translating that on the page. And so his stuff is just so real and so powerful. And he writes middle grade, young adult, novels in verse, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, it was so satisfying to hear that last night.
It's interesting you talking about Jason and his style. And High, you mentioned that this is a novel in verse. Are we talking about the one kind of rhythm that flows through the entire novel, or does is the novel kind of made up of different poems or different verse, and we hear different rhythms when we're talking about different characters?
Yeah, so each poem is entirely different. But one thing I did do is title each poem after a Rolling Stones song, because as I was writing this, I just listened to every single Rolling Stones album ever, and I chose my favorites, and I named them after certain songs, although, the narrative is consecutive as far as it has a plot arc and a character arc in the same way that any other novel would. But each page is different. Some, are a few lines only. Some are much longer. Some will change the font size. So visually you see a word and it jumps out at you. There is rhyming, internal rhyme. There is some intentional rhyme. There are a few that have like a real structure, but for the most part, it's free verse. and it is open to interpretation, but it will engage the reader, visually with changing the font, changing the shape on the page, changing whether, word is put in bold or not, because some are actually, very big on the page. There's one where the main character is, wanting to have some kind of hope. And so the word hope starts out in about an 8-point font. And by the end, it's like 44 font and it's jumping out at you. But visually, as you're reading this, I think it is effective, and it does what the action is doing internally and externally. So that's my goal with using verse, is to really take advantage of the auditory rhythms and sounds, which, you can use repetition, you can use that rhyme, and none are the same. So every poem is like, experiencing something slightly different depending on the effect that you want to get, which is generally an emotion, a visceral pull into the story. So you're using the words just to pull you in. And there's no method to the madness. It's really based on that moment in the story and what I want to bring out. So yeah, that's just an example. There's another one that's, a jigsaw puzzle, and the words are kind of slightly scrambled on the page. And so you kind of have to make sense of them. And it's the character also making sense of all these different problems that she's feeling in her confusion and her trying to get to a better place.
We were talking about the power of sitting down and taking a book like High and reading it together, co-reading it, and then come together as a family book club or a community book club and talking about it. But as you're talking about the different rhymes and how you structured it and how you kind of give signposts almost for, here's where the emphasis is going with this, I think that this would be an absolutely fabulous book to read aloud. I mean, reading aloud with your teens is powerful, but to read this aloud and to take turns doing the different readings and putting yourself into the characters, that would be a tremendously powerful experience.
Absolutely. And, novels in verse are exciting to read out loud. Another favorite writer of mine is Kwame Alexander, who has written the Crossover series, hugely popular with boys and girls. And it's so much fun to listen to him read because he just power packs, punches in every page. So I try to learn from that. And I would love to hear, students reading and with other grown-ups or family members, because it is supposed to be heard aloud, really. And when I was writing this book, I read everything aloud, a number of times just to make sure there wasn't a clunky space or, things read the way they should and had that rhythm to them. And you can and I recommend for my students that they read everything out loud, because it's important to, really take ownership of your work by seeing it on the page, but hearing it also.
Mm-hmm. And that's something we haven't talked about recently here on the podcast. When you're hearing the story, you're hearing it with a different part of your brain than you are when you're reading it, and so it makes a different impression. And again, and that's I just love to encourage families to continue to read aloud with their kids, no matter what age they are. As you were talking just now about your book and about reading it aloud, I'm just envisioning what a great time this is. Central Square Theater, that little black box theater.
Yes.
That's where I should go there.
Yes.
There should be some Harvard or Cambridge High student, Cambridge Fringe and Latin students reading this aloud. I'd get a ticket for that.
Oh, that's such a good idea. They had an open mic the last summer, and I couldn't go to that slot, but I kept thinking that's exactly what I want to do. I just want to go and put it out there, to whoever's listening, and, with a mic so I can really get some sound and carry through Central Square. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's a great idea to follow up on. Thank you for that.
You are welcome. You let me know how that is coming along, because I'd love to be a part of that.
Good.
Yeah. Hey, Mary, where can we go to find out more about High and find out more about you?
All right. So my website is marysullivan.net. You can go there. My Instagram is at by Mary Sullivan, all small letters. So, remember Insta, all small letters. And for Twitter, at by Mary Sullivan, but the M and S are capitalized. So by Mary Sullivan in small or with a cap on the M and S for Twitter. And I would love to have more followers.
Yes, indeed. Mary, I didn't ask you this beforehand, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. We're right at the end of the interview. Is there a section of High that you would, 2 or 3 lines that you might want to read with us, for us?
2 or 3 lines? That's going to be tough, but...
or longer, whatever.
Oh, can I read just one? I'll just read one poem if that's okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. So I'll read this one, I guess. I haven't read this one out loud too often, but this one's called Dandelion, and it takes place after the mother has OD'd, and Ceti has just finished her final game for state championship, and she finds out her mother has OD'd. She has a couple friends in here, Ruby and her friend Will, and Will's younger sister Nia. And I'll just try this one out.
Okay.
I don't know. I just feel like it because I like the title, Dandelion. Mom's lies are blowing around inside my head. Can't hear her anymore. Walk by Foxface for the last time. And Foxface is the mother's boyfriend who has OD'd and died. Now everyone will know who I really am. White trash junkie girl living a lie. Will's got my ball tucked under his arm. Ruby and Angie are in the front, clearing the way. Holding my backpack in one hand, Nia's hand in another, I make my feet go forward and walk by their open doors in the hallway. Everyone's staring at me. Everyone knows Mom OD'd. Someone's baby is crying. The police radio is blaring, and people are talking about the nothing they think they know. But they're not dissing me. They're saying, good game today, Ceti. We got you. You'll pull through, honey. I'm sorry. Hey, girl, it'll be all right. Hey, baby, let me know what you need. We're here for you. We got you. Thank you, I say. Surprised they're not hating. And I go down to the 7th. No sister, no mother, but I know there's another and just don't know how to get there. I wish I did. Nia is there. Do you want me to put a flower in your hair? Okay, I whisper. I wish I could stay here with her, fingers kneading my hair. Mom and I used to look for dandelions you could blow in the wind and make a wish. I can hear her now. I did my best, Ceti. What else can I do? I laugh a little, 'cause her best blew away in the wind a long time ago.
Wow. Powerful. I was right there. That's a great place to end. Mary Sullivan.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me at your show. It went by too fast.
I know. We've been talking with the author of High, a young adult novel in verse written by our guest, Mary Sullivan. Mary, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Alicia Smith, the author of My FIFO Dad, and Alva Sachs, here to celebrate Sam and Sadie's Super Sleuths. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Mary Sullivan. Be sure to check out High. Also want to thank our sponsors, Abigail's Dragons by Patrick Matthews and The Cookie by Manny Showalter. I want to thank my amazing team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Nicole Belcastro, Mirabella Q, Rain Pan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you so much for visiting our website, readingwithyourkids.com. And most of all, thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.